Thank you so much for generously reading.
Spell your last name so we can write the website.
All right. It's Mona Lisa Saloy, all one name. S as in Sam, ALOY.com. And there's a lot of information there, but it hasn't been updated in a long time. But I'm going to work on that. The blessing of being Poet Laureate has been extraordinary. It's what... Okay, could you probably stop? Thank you. And if you're really hungry, you have to eat. Okay. So the interesting thing about this position is it's a great honor, and I am thrilled. And it's only God, I'm telling you. I've been nominated many times, and I was thrilled for that. So if God opens the door, I say, okay, Lord, I'm walking through. And this time he said it was my turn. So I am really, really honored and thrilled. And what it means really is that I've been doing this a while and people have noticed, thank you God again. And what you do for your work, it adds up over time. So we all have to start somewhere. And I was fortunate to begin young, but I guess I should tell you my story and then read a little bit. And I love this project that you propose about writers. There's a new book on black women writers in Louisiana, just came out. And I was surprised at them knowing some of my story. I'm thinking, when did they hear me do this? But people pick things up. Anyway, it's important to do that, to tell our stories. And I hope that all of you continue to do that. And you should know there's no competition. There's no you except you. There's no you except you. And everything you have to offer, someone needs to hear it. And when I began, it was post the Black Arts Movement, and black was newly beautiful. But I'm the last of the Jim Crow generation. So I didn't know anything about black writers. I didn't know anything about black culture except Eli Whitney founded the Cotton Gin. And I went to wonderful Catholic schools that raised me morally and ethically like my parents. But they didn't teach us anything about ourselves, not even a lot about the state. And interestingly enough, you should understand that I come from two traditions. One is the obvious, the academic one. I worked my way through school. Sometimes I tell my students, sometimes I had 6 jobs in one semester. And I sewed, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. I sewed through most of my degrees until I became a writer, and then I was able to get writing jobs, and I'll tell you about that. The other side is the oral tradition. My mother's father, my maternal grandfather, was born enslaved in Alabama and walked to New Orleans to be free. I heard that all my life. And Papa used to hold court on the front porch. And I'm thinking he's just a good liar and he talks smack. Everybody loves to hear him. But he was so old. He lived to be 110. And we only know that because there was no birth certificate. But he tried to join the army in World War I. And he was such a tall, strapping man. Physically fit. He tried to pass for 35. They said, oh no, you're well over 50. And so we traced his birth that way. And it's in the U.S. Army record, which is interesting. And so my oldest brother, who's now passed a couple of years, he would be 94 now. So I'm an old people's child. So I had the advantage of hearing the stories. And my papa was a Baptist minister, but I had to go to college to learn that the traditions that we passed on, even his brick making and then cement finishing, he learned on the farm in Alabama and passed that on to his sons, who became professional bricklayers and cement finishers. Matter of fact, they did the foundation to my house. So, and they did work all over the 7th Ward. So I come from this oral tradition, but it was in college that I learned that the stories Papa told us were indeed West African tales, passed on by word of mouth, face to face, generation to generation, which is indeed the definition of folklore. And my professor's name was Simon Mpondu. I will never forget him. He was from Senegal, or the Senegambia area, fluent en parler en français, en French. And literally, some of the stories Papa told were given back to me as straight up African tales. So that turned me on to folklore. And also, prior to that, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the first black woman to get gold in the Olympics, but Jim Crow said no. And I lost my mom as a teenager, and my dad was grieving, and the situation was a little nebulous with his drinking friends. And so the black Creole women in the neighborhood said, it's time for you to go. I had my own money because I'd been working since I was 12. My dad was a sergeant in World War II. We had to earn our keep. If we wanted something, we had to work for it. And I'm so glad for that because it made me independent. And my dad was always loving, but he was the reader and the writer as well. He wrote obituaries for people who were illiterate. He wrote to the families who couldn't contact their people. He wrote letters for people to get Social Security, all my uncles, so they were able to retire because he could fill out those things for them. So he was the writer, and he published a poem called The Sea. It was published in the Army World War II Journal. And I had a copy of it until Hurricane Katrina. I swear, I lost everything, a lot of people. So Miss Ingrid, I feel you. Been there, done that. It took me, and I'll tell you about that later. But so I have this oral tradition and this academic tradition, but then I have this writerly tradition from my dad. So I'm triply blessed and very thankful. And then I was caregiver for my dad at the end of his life. So I had the honor of getting to know him grown. I was a daddy's girl. They thought they weren't still able. Hey, so it was great to learn who he was. And so you'll hear his voice in my stories. And it seasoned me in a way because I married young and married the wrong person. 6 months after we were married, and we had worked together for 2 years. We swam together. We did, what do you call that? Demonstrations all over the Northwest. It was great. He took me hiking in the mountains and skiing. I thought I died and went to heaven. And he was a swimmer. But 6 months after we were married, we had a car accident. I broke my pelvis in half, had a hole in my lung, and lost my memory for 2 years. I didn't know who I was, and he did not tell my family. So I didn't know who I was, and no one I knew me. So it was hard, and only the grace of God took me through it. And so I prayed a lot, but let me tell you, becoming myself. So the doctor in Oregon where the accident happened said, you just write things down. And I kept a journal. I would fill up these little spiral 10-cent at that time notebooks, fill them up. And I literally wrote to remember. And my ex-husband and I were living in student housing, and next door was a cafe, and young black writers were there reading the works out loud of Alice Walker and Sonia Sanchez and Leroy Jones at the time, and who became Amiri Baraka. And I would carry my pillow because I couldn't sit down. And I'd stand there, and I was there every night they were there. And they said, well, who are you? And so they would pick my brain. I started talking about Marie Laveau and the kind of stories we heard as a child. But again, I wasn't quite sure who I was. And they said, you talk like a writer. And I said, what's that? They took me to their teachers who became my mentors. One in particular, Dr. Colleen McElroy. And she said, what to do with this? And I never looked back. So I had wonderful professors who literally guided me. Charles Johnson was my mentor and professor. And it was through him that I was able to publish last year in the Chicago Review. Well, they had a body of people choosing, but he invited me to submit. So the Chicago Review, they did a special issue of African American literature. So I'm honored to be in that. But, so again, everything you do adds up. And I just never looked back. So for me, it's always been about the work, always been about telling our stories, our history, not somebody else's history, that eliminated all our contributions and the people who survived. There's not a day that goes, I rebuilt my home new, and it's 15 feet up, and it's kind of tall, and there's not a day that goes by and people say, I can't believe you. And it was half built for 8 years because I didn't have the money, and we were stiffed by every storm from insurance, even though you pay for decades. And people say, I can't believe you didn't give up. It's not in my DNA. It's not in our DNA. We have no choice. God gives us one day at a time, one moment at a time, one breath at a time, and it's a gift. That's why we call it the present. And my ancestors said that to me all my life. They also reminded me every day is not promised. And since this pandemic, even before, we've lost a lot of elders, but we've just buried too many people. So anyway, I just wanted to give you an idea that I didn't plan this life. This is the life God chose for me. And I've tried to be worthy and to do my best. And by the grace of God, also, my students are very successful. Thank you, God, again. One is a Pulitzer Prize winner, Jericho Brown. One runs the Louisiana, he's a vice president at the Louisiana Weekly. You met Naya.
Yes.
And she has her own public relations firm. And they were wonderful. They worked on the student journal. And so I pass on the skills I have. And I have to at least do for them what people did for me. And then, of course, I tell them, yes, we're the older generation. But because we've lived long, experience means we've made a lot of mistakes. So you're here to benefit from that. And so I'm going to share some of my work, and then you can ask questions. And like the academic side, and because I was in the academy, meaning higher education, for me, self-publishing was not an option, although I was encouraged to do journals because, I don't know if you know this, but during the Black Arts Movement, there were thousands of Black literary journals. They're all gone. But a handful of excellent ones remain. The Black Scholar, Obsidian, and I just appeared in Obsidian in December last year. What else? The African American Review. And there's a few others I can share that with you another time, but so many are no. Oh, and publishing companies came out of that. Third World Press. And they had a reading journal that was wonderful. And actually, I still have some hard copies that survived Katrina because they were high up. And so that was a way for you to get out there. If you're in higher education, you have to get published in journals so that people can begin to hear you. Well, now we have social media. Now you have podcasts. Now you can do other things. But in those days, it was slow. You had to type up each poem. You had to send it out to a dozen places, and one place at a time. And if you had it returned, then you typed up another cover letter, put another stamp on it, and return stamp, and wait for that to come back. And that's what I was taught to do, and that's what I did. And so we worked it. But again, it was always about the work, always sharing the work. And I've been blessed to appear in many journals many journals over the years, because that's what we do. And then ultimately, the bigger publishing companies, I guess, they still do what they do. But they used to be operated by editors and writers. And then it became big business and run by paper companies and oil companies. So it was the little presses, the smaller presses, that were more interested in creative works. It was the university presses that were interested in regional and cultural works. And so I interned at the University of Washington Press. I interned at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. I worked at community papers. I always made money as a writer. That was a thrill after the sewing. I mean, the first thing I learned to sew, those of you who remember, when we hung clothes on the line, we made dresses to cover the hanger, and it was a clothespin holder, but my mother worked at Haspel Brothers. She sewed tropical seersucker suits. And so they would bring the scraps home, and we made toys out of that, dolls' clothes, and we made these little covers that were like a dress with box pleats or single pleats. And so that's how I learned how to sew. And my mother was a modiste, meaning a very specialized tailor. She made dresses. My Aunt Mary was a modiste. They did everything from, my grandmother made rugs out of scraps. I mean, nothing was ever wasted. I didn't know that we just couldn't afford to waste anything, but nothing was wasted. Talk about recycling. And it was a joy. We just made everything better. Any room you entered, you were supposed to make it prettier than you found it. And so we made a lot of things. Everything from crocheting, and that was what they made us do in the rain. Crocheting. Well, I never learned how to knit till I was older, but crocheting and making the doilies to sit on the couch. Everything had to be prettier and making. So I sewed my way through all my degrees, really, and ended up sewing for guys in the NBA, some of the Globetrotters, boy bands. Wow. And why? Because men paid more. You sew for a woman and she wants to take it up and down 5 times for no extra money. But man, you put a zipper in a man's pants, he will tip you big time. So I said, oh! I also worked in little factories where for the first 4 hours of the day, you made beaucoup de money. And then after lunch, So, and it was little Filipino women and Chinese women way in backs of stores, but it was a way to make money, and I could work as I wanted to. So I enjoyed that, and I even worked for Woolly Mammoth sewing leather and fur and straw. I mean, I did upholstery, whatever it took, but I was able to make a way for me to study and write. And I've just never looked back. So the wonderful thing about growing up with disciplined parents where you have to work hard to make it, it has served me very well. And one of my friends, high school friends, says, "When do you rest?" "Oh, I rest. When my head hits the pillow, I sleep like a brick." But I've earned it. I even know how to wake up and earn my breakfast. I don't even eat anything until I've worked a little bit or walked, and that's the way we were raised. So I just want to give you a kind of bird's eye. And one day I'm going to write my memoir when I grow up. When I grow up, when I grow up, and I'll retire from teaching when I grow up. But I love that my students need me, and they appreciate my experiences. Some of the new generation think they know everything. That was my experience this week. Give it time. So let me read some material. I'll start with some from, this came up. I think this is a few words on my words. This year I saw my mother's African eyes in my mirror. My dad's Creole face over my skin like a glove. I answer to 2 names, smell of coconuts and gardenia. I feed pages words until they speak the lives I've seen or heard of. Promises made and promises broken regularly like hearts or pecans. I let each line rotate head to toe, savor each phrase like a peach cobbler dessert. The cinnamon taste lasts like a warm smile. I cut and paste hope between the lines. Keep the pictures that black words pour from my fingertips, stretching like the sun to paint rainbows in empty spaces. Thank you. Oh, thank you. And this one is called Louisiana Log, and it's for all of us in the state. It's dedicated to Bob Kaufman, who, like many of the Black Beats, first of all, he's born and raised in my neighborhood in the 7th Ward. And he was the Black Beat poet who took Allen Ginsberg and Kerouac to the Negro streets at dawn, as it says in Ginsberg's most famous poem. And like him, they were merchant seamen. So they'd met in New York, but they were really dear friends in San Francisco. He's famous the world over. So I'm determined to finish the biography on him at some point. I keep chipping away at it, but this is called, and when I say it's for him, it's because I read him as a Southern writer, but not only that, they were all enamored of Walt Whitman and the long lines. So the supermarket poem of Ginsberg and the kinds of long lines that some of Kaufman's work. So Louisiana Log is in that vein. Louisiana Log for Bob Kaufman. Land south of the Mason-Dixon, of Gulf waters and Mississippi tugboat size. Land of cane, rice, and watermelon, jungle plums. Po' boys, patios, patois, pecans, pecan pies, pralines, papier-mâché masks, Place of oak tree swamps, pine and cypress, with hanging gray moss punctuated by peacocks and pirogues. Land of Creoles, Cajuns, Black Indians, Cowans, mudbugs, catfish, and bayou crooners. Region of hot, wet air, heavy with hurricanes, honeysuckle, Irish hash, and haints. That's ghosts. Land of black-faced Zulus, Louis Armstrong, river dragons and griots, grits and gree-gree with loup-garou sunsets. Zone of cockfights, absinthe, tafia, anisette, and gospel groups, congree and gravel sidewalks. Land of deep-fried fritters, the boot state, trying to keep its head afloat, the Long Lake state, the polluted Pontchartrain, the Tooth Fairy state, the coon-ass state, the red pepper state, the home of Tabasco sauce. The U.S. precinct of Mardi Gras and street parades with great flambeaux and marching bands, the best in the Southland. Home of pelicans and cranes, roaches, a finger long that fly and face you at sunup. Climate of smiling eyes and handshakes and great hugs and southern hot dews when every day's a come on out of the thunder shower day. Longitude of lagniappe, yeah, you're right, and starlit nights. Meridian of Coubillon and hush puppies, gumbo and deathless days, everyday hallelujahs, crawfish bisque, praying in tongues, novenas and graveyard gifts of lilies, silver dimes, and bambula. Tropic below sea level of Scorpio and St. Joseph salutations, people who parade, paint faces and forearms like irises and demons. Domain of bayous, levees, canals, alligators, bugaloosa, and wrought iron fences. Neighborhood of voodoo good luck and yam crops and misbeliefs, and the password is party and umbrellas dance. Latitude of leprosy and soybeans, clover and jasmine, mildew and dead moss. Vicinity of sidewalk cafes, boulevards, preachers and priests with cathedrals of saints' bones and a chafalaya. Soil of courtyards and river blues, Professor Longhair piano riffs, Zydeco and rosaries on Wednesday nights. The Mahalia Jackson and Fats domino belt, where the saints come march where you find your thrill. Terrain of cotton and fireflies, bumblebees and cats, tiger stripe to Siamese, in alleyways and garbage heaps of oyster shells and shrimp leavings. There's more cats per square inch here than most states. Department of Big Chief, cafe au lait and beignets, galette, and couscous and milk. Sphere of classical and Dixieland jazz, rhythm and blues, bayou blues with Baptist, Catholics, and the Ku Klux Klan with jazz singers and souls crying. State of Chocolate City number 10 with fortune tellers and spiritual healers, wall geckos, muddy water, and missionaries. District of Sweat and Shade, the second line, Mississippi moonlit nights, Saturday night suppers in the backyard, the sanctioned speakeasies. Confines of Thibodeau, Chapatulas, Houma, and Louisiana red and wingtips. Native land of Jive and Jambalaya. The Crescent City, the city care forgot and remembered for true.
Wow.
Awesome. Oh my goodness.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. When I was a young poet in San Francisco, I was studying my first master's in writing as a poet. I actually studied with Stan Rice, who was Anne Rice's husband. His first book was called White Boy. He was from Texas. But he was a wonderful poet, and he saw the South in me and accepted me into the graduate program and always encouraged me. And during that time, I was honored to become poet in residence at the San Francisco African American Historical and Cultural Society. Oh boy, that was a great honor for me. This was a multi-generational neighborhood society of black people in the Fillmore, which was the black neighborhood in San Francisco originally. And the secretary of the group had been W.B. Du Bois's secretary for 30 years. So it was black people who worked in civil rights, who knew great minds. And not only was it a library, but a museum. They had Sergeant Johnson sculptures, and they had actual artifacts from enslavement. They had people's journals. They had physical artifacts. And part of my work there was to consult to the Afro-American Museums Association, who sent me to New Orleans in 1984 for the World's Fair. And I was so excited to come back home. Well, at the time, Alice Walker won the Pulitzer Prize, and the group, we had a writer's workshop. So I collected money, and we bought her purple roses, long stem roses, and we presented them at Marcus Bookstore, which was the black bookstore, and he was a printer, a fine printer. He had pictures of great black authors all over the walls and everything. And so we presented the roses to her and at her book signing. And she later sent us a check for $1,000 to the workshop. Oh, we were so thrilled. And I had a copy of that check till Katrina. I said, I'm keeping a copy of that check.
So much away.
Yes, so much. And so after that trip to New Orleans, and you should know the reason, I moved back the next year, but I moved back because the welcoming committee for this group of blacks from all over the country with the Afro-American Museums Association was the great jazz banjo player, Danny Barker, and Sybil Morial, who was the First Lady of New Orleans at the time. And they kept reiterating that the youth left and went away to get an education, and there was a brain drain, and that the youth needed to return. Honey, I came home the next year. And it was through them that I saw, just so many things that as a child I didn't. But anyway, so coming home on the flight back to the Northwest, I wrote this poem as a thank you to Alice Walker for supporting the workshop. And it was that moment I knew I had to move back home. And the title is the first line of the poem. I'd forgotten the loud. I'd forgotten the loud laughing locusts do at night, the smell of hot grass steaming under end of summer rain. Hurricane Elena was prayed away from New Orleans by holy women, Haints and Loas. Hurricanes, the Crescent City Crusade, like Bayou music from Alan Toussaint, the rhythm and blues basic brew. Hey there, sugar dumpling, let me tell you something. You look so sweet and you so doggone fine. From King Floyd or Irma Thomas, who used to be called colored singers or Chitlin Circuit crooners. New Orleans leaves a honey taste in my mouth. The cracked boulevards and weeping willows shade bare front porches and call her children home. I holler, hey now, come southern grown like Meliton and magnolias. Thank you, thank you.
That's a picture you can see.
And then I mentioned my father, whose voice is so present here because it was the years with him that these poems, this is called Red Beans and Rice Lake Creole Quarters. So the first one is about my name. And people say, really? But what you have to know is I've met Filipino Mona Lisas. I met one white Mona Lisa who was in the penitentiary somewhere because she reached out to me. And we're all within a decade or a decade and a half of age because Nat King Cole made it popular. Now, what you may not know is that originally, he was a jazz pianist and wanted to be known as that. And at the end of the 40s, he and his trio, I don't know if it was a trio or quartet, but small group, were invited to a national radio broadcast. First ever black jazz national broadcast. And the crooner didn't show up. And he said, man, you got to sing this song. He said, no, I'm not a singer, I'm a jazz pianist. And they said, man, he ain't here, and we're not giving up this opportunity. So he sang Mona Lisa And the rest is history. And of course, he was on TV with his own show for almost a decade, and then in reruns for another half decade. So literally from the 50s to the beginning of the 60s. So there, I met a lot of. So this is about my name. Nat King Cole babies and Black Mona Lisas. Everybody asks, really? Is Mona Lisa your name? Hey, Da Vinci's daughter, huh? Or they call another name of note. I'm Muhammad Ali. Or you call a friend, leave your name, and they say, is some picture calling you? Or they do a double take. Say what? See, we are late World War II boom babies, cuddled, loved, conceived, on backs of pickups, back porches, and starlit rooms to Nat King Cole. The last sister I met named Mona Lisa came from Chicago in beaded braids. She was a waitress at the Oakland Athletic Club. It was Kwanzaa. She said, hey girl, like she knew me. Said, yeah, it was a radio hit. Nat King Cole sang it on his own TV show in the 1950s. Everybody sang Mona Lisa. Well, Mona Lisa Wilson and I went to Xavier Prep a year. Mona Lisa Carr was a year older at Joseph S. Clark, then a trade high school. Real cute, a fine cheerleader. I never knew her, but I hated her to myself. Was ashamed by myself, too. My daddy bears most claim to calling me. Mother says I was his baby girl, and he thought they weren't still able. Cousin Mildred says she told him to do it, said the Mona Lisa was on loan from the Louvre, all in the news. But my daddy says in World War II, the day he saw the Mona Lisa in Paris, he saw little French boys catching rats for food in the streets, and he brought them his GI rations, and he thought if he just had another baby girl. So my sister hated me for so long, and my brothers didn't pay no mind about names, except Junior. He would sing the Mona Lisa song to me like Uncle Toot, Uncle Herbert at a piano, Uncle Clifford, and Mr. Charles. Mona Lisa, Mona Lisa, men have named you. You're so like the lady with the mystic smile. Is it only 'cause you're lonely they have named you? Or is it that Mona Lisa strangeness in your smile? Do you smile to tempt the lover, Mona Lisa? Or is it their way to hide a broken heart? Many dreams have been brought to your doorstep. They just lie there and they die there. Are you warm? Are you really Mona Lisa? Or just a cold and lonely, lovely work of art? Now, the late 60s cursed European namesakes. I reminded many I was born black on a black block in the 7th Ward on the backside of New Orleans. And I always thought Nat King Cole, Mona Lisa was Nat King Cole's lover like Sweet Lorraine. I recalled Iris, Janice, and Joan. Iris had green eyes, mustard tan skin. She was littler than me, and we always fought for something. Janice had blue eyes, blonde hair, solid blood. Her daddy, Mr. John, was handsome, dark tan with thick Latin brown hair, and she beat me up regularly. Joan was jet black with short black hair, and I knew they called her a tack behind her back till I come round because I knew they called my mother that. Joan thought I was too yellow and they didn't know why I wanted to be with her, but she was the only one could outswim, outdance, outdraw, out-make-believe anybody. Well, they all called me a nappy-headed yellow nigger between scratching and pulling hair. Mona Lisa got nappy hair, Mona Lisa got nappy hair. So about the time I stopped frying my hair, stopped slapping lye on it or trying tint, Sun Ra told me I looked like the Oni, or a Zulu queen, and told me my hair is sculptured to crown my nappiness. But I'll always remember Nat King Cole singing to me, loving me like my uncles.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you. And I should tell you that I met Nat King Cole's son at the African American Historical and Cultural Society. And he heard me read this. He was floored and had no clue that there were so many Mona Lisas, so many black Mona Lisas, other Mona Lisas. He really, see, you have a niece.
A cousin, yeah, a cousin.
Yep. And so he was thrilled, and it was what a delight to meet him. All right, these are a few poems for my dad, and this is called My Creole Daddy One. This is my dad's blue easy chair, 4 years old and still too new. It blues his eyes when he sits, sipping coffee and chicory, more like Mississippi River mud. This is my dad's green shirt that fades his eyes gray sometimes when he calls me by my sister's name now. But I remember that he wiped my behind and mopped the floors when Mother, tired of walking all over New Orleans, to Congress hats for that special Applejack brim he needed to blend with this green shirt he can no longer button by himself. I fold family memories with this green seersucker shirt thinning finally like Daddy's Snow White 87-year-old hair. He walked the beaches of Marseille, flew over North Africa, and whipped up Coubillon for GI buddies, like Mr. Newstetter, Mr. Jackson whenever they landed. Newstetter called Daddy Nutshot, he said, since he was a short dude and would end fights with a quick, swift kick you-know-where. It never failed. And what was my mother's name again? Mr. Jackson brings my daddy cigarettes Fridays when he visits his brother Tommy, who sits near my daddy's good ear in the day room. Jackson brings me Mentos all the damn time. Must have saved his life or something. You get me? Ain't seen him in 50 years or more in my company. There's no place like New Orleans. No way, yeah. Cowans used to crawl out the swamp into my black iron pot. His blue eyes fade under lids drunk with sleep. He draws a long swig of near beer. Old dudes taste just like a bud, Daddy affirms. It satisfies his need for a cold one now. You look just like your mother, girl, but you're just too yellow. Any more bread pudding? He was a character. Daddy's philosophy, too. Daddy loves coffee with chicory in his cream and sugar every morning just after 5:30. Says he eats to keep from getting hungry. At 86, he forgets when and what he eats, especially Haagen-Dazs on a stick. Can inhale one after another with a smile like sunshine, like while peeling away the plastic wrap. He sees me watching, says that's what it means. What? I ask. La joie de vivre, he says. The joy of life? I ask. Sure, the New Orleans motto, he says. The reasons for heavenly hips, drumstick thighs, and huggable bellies. Yeah, you're right. Even the French say that, Daddy. No, girl, not like we do. We work like we don't need the money. We love like we never been hurt. We dance like nobody's watching, and we eat like there's no tomorrow. Awesome. Daddy Poem 3, New Orleans Then. Mother says I was born at home on the 4-poster I sleep on still, well, till Katrina. Says she dropped me into Daddy's hands on a Friday afternoon. Said, I laughed and laughed again. Mother says she didn't even know I was coming till she fell down the back porch steps, a faint spell or a haint visit, she thought, a ghost visit. And Daddy thinking their baby making days long since gone. They were chewing on short grass in those days, Daddy says. So Mother sewed future dreams into our dresses and Haspel Brothers' tropical seersucker suits. Those days, Daddy aimed to stop working for the cigar factory, to stop passing for white just to keep a job, to survive. He wrapped and shipped the finest tobacco rolls, he said, to feed us. Said at the cigar factory he had to listen to all sorts of hateful slurs, his stomach churning all day long, the puke taste rising to his tongue on the streetcar ride home. Some days he walked off his anger, saved the bus fare for us for soft drinks at dinner. The 5 of us on red beans and rice Mondays with Dixiana French bread, Tuesdays with cornbread, Wednesdays with galette, pan-fried shortening bread, and Barks cream soda or root beer. The sweetest days we knew.
Wow.
Thank you. And this is Daddy Poem 4, and then I'll switch a bit. Daddy Poem 4. My daddy was a man. He might have been high yellow, but no one was blacker inside. That came from his Uncle Henri, a dark Creole who raised him after his dad left his mom and little sister Mildred. Daddy quit school in the 3rd grade to work, be the man of the house. His first job at the cigar factory, he sorted tobacco, then rolled watching the wrinkled faces happy for $1 a day. The smell, he said, soaked his skin and all weekend washing left traces. Then Mondays rubbed the cigar smell into his pores again. I can see him now, a short, wiry, white-looking black kid who had to keep his mouth shut so the bosses wouldn't know he was colored. With third-grade schooling, said he counted faster than the lot of grown men, had a knack for organizing, away with customers, never lost a sale. So they put him on deliveries where he picked up new customers all along River Road, driving around the Pelican State at 15 years old, bringing home beaucoup de l'argent since 8. My daddy, he was a man. Okay, and this is the last one for Daddy. This is Daddy 5. Well, it's not the last one, but the last one of this series. We think of women outliving men, but my dad outlived wives. My dad loved 3 families. Ours was the second. He outlived 2 wives, buried them in a flow of tears and beer long as the Mississippi. Mostly, I remember lots of hugs and kisses, snuggling next to Daddy during the nightly news on TV after dinner daily, or him dancing with my dark chocolate mother at night at the Autocrat Social and Pleasure Club on St. Bernard Avenue. On Fridays in season, we had crawfish by the pound, oyster loaves, or hot sausage sandwiches at Mulet's, with draft beer we took home in a stainless steel pot that sealed like a canning jar. Springtime brought Cowan, Daddy's expert taking of its head, that swamp turtle, gently removing the neck gland, a purple thing of poison if burst. He hung the headless turtle, it still kicking for 3 days on the wooden fence. Even its head snapped for hours in the grass. Never lost a Cowan. Its 21 meat favors tasting of beef, pork, fish, and then some. The turtle eggs, Mother's favorite, promised youth, health, and sexy eyes, Daddy said. When he shooed aunts, uncles, and mother out of the kitchen, he blended herbs for sauté and his special roux before stewing. Big Sunday breakfasts with galette, stovetop shortening bread, and homemade cocoa. Omelets whipped just so to let Mother sleep late, then wake us for church. He wouldn't come, just said, "Pray for me, I'll get to glory." Go long so, Daddy.
Wow. What was that meat you were talking about?
Cowan. So the turtle is swamp turtle. They're huge, and when you stewed it, you fed the whole family. But the meat, there's 21 meat flavors inside the shell.
Never had that.
So when you stew it, and then you have to kill it, you have to cut. You know where to pull the neck out. Cut it just so, because if you hit the gland, it ruins the whole turtle. And then you have to hang it on the fence for 5 days, and it'll still kick. And the blood drips. And so when that's done, it's like 3 days. And when that's done, then it's ready for stewing. So nobody had big homes, but we had outdoor parties, and so everybody was welcome. And so when they stewed turtles, that was Cowan. That was a big thing. That was a spring after Easter time, around Easter time.
Spell it?
Cowan, Cawain. Yeah, so swamp turtle.
Okay.
Yeah. And sweet story, I read a Dookie Chase one day, and I read that poem, and Mrs. Chase said, "Oh, I forgot about Cowan." And I forgot about galette. I said, "I'm not giving you my recipe." That was so sweet to me. And just her acknowledgement. Okay, now these are from the first book, and we've all lost a lot of people in this time. This has been, and of course here we know, you guys live here, so you know about second lines, but that's part of the African American, the Black American sacred tradition. And so the first line is, of course, one of sorrow, and they play, the music is a dirge, and then once the person is buried, then you celebrate the life well lived. And so this poem is in homage of that, and the way we bury, the way we say goodbye. And this is called The Last Mile, after the gospel hymn. The Last Mile. It comes like a rider on a horse. You hear it long before it arrives. The empty silence broken like a clap of thunder in a scared heart too beaten to break. You smell it too. The rot coming in slowly the way gnats and moths wander toward light. If you're lucky, it's announced. Devil's bread growing in a yard, still an unwelcomed visitor. Digging it up melts the fungus, but death keeps coming like termites and lice in an old shed. So within the city of the living, we prepare for the city of the dead. The quiet place of narrow St. Augustine-lined walkways, of cement-covered brick or marble and granite slab tombs stacked like little houses above the ground, listing families and friends long gone. First, take off the shoes, and no new shoes at the service, or the cemetery, or the dead will rise jealous to get them and you. Second, cover the mirrors so the soul can't stay here. Next, unplug clocks, stop time, and face the dead east to meet God in glory, and the here will be gone after now. Then awake, a last visit with the shell, the effigy of the one gone. Last respects for the living who loved and love on. It may be for an evening or a week, a chance to pray and wish the soul well on its way. Its new life after living. Now the living bake and cook for kin, so they may grieve and suspend caring for 3 days. The first line. Then grieve and cry and ache and holler and faint from loss and emptiness for the spaces once filled no more, for the times together alive in memory only, so the living may go on again until the next time. In the city of the dead, where the clean whitewashed tombs are flooded with flowers, mums mostly, and carnations of every hue, a lily or two among wrought iron fences, or in vases in the small shelves, here the rich and famous bear epitaphs. Famille de Widow Paris, née Lavaux, born Lavaux. Sigit, here lies Marie Philome Glapion, décédée le 11 juin 1897, âgée de 72 ans, 62 years old. Elle fut bonne mère, she was a good mother, bonne amie et a good friend, et regrettée partout, missed by all. Ce qui l'ont connue, who knew her, passons, priez pour elle. Passers-by, please pray for her in St. Louis Cemetery, number 1. In the city of the dead, you can visit, kneel the Stations of the Cross at St. Roch Cemetery. Make a novena and pray a petition with lit candles for favors. Or pilgrimage on Good Friday when you can pray and leave money at each of 9 churches, and a husband is promised before the year ends. For luck, pick a 4-leafed clover, the red ones from the blood of a bride-to-be whose suicide marks her grave here. The last release is the best, the second line dance. Dance, swoon, and ride your grief like there's no tomorrow. The melodies will sway like waves in a hurricane, hurried, smashing, then softly calm before the last rush of grief. There is a sadness in the silence after death. Then grieve, cry, and ache and holler, and faint from loss and emptiness for the spaces once filled no more, for the times together alive in memory only, so the living may go on again until the next time. As I walk the last mile of the way, I will rest at the close of the day, and I know there are joys that await me as I walk the last mile of the way.
Very nice.
Thank you. Thank you. It's our culture.
Cheers to yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay,
All of that.
She does it all.
my mother was a singer. I'm gonna tell my cousins that I come from a family of musicians. Let me hum in the background. Yeah, keep up with a little harmony, but
Wow. Awesome.
okay. What time? How are we looking time-wise?
Keep going.
We've got about, we usually try to end around noon, but
Okay.
if you want to take some.
Well, I want to take questions. I want to end with this poem. It's the last poem in the book.
I got all day.
And it's called We've Come This Far. It isn't hard to see how Africans in America embraced a Western church. God was no stranger. God woke up the day, cried over anger, calmed the nights with starlight, and gave Africans in America serenity as a shield. We suckled pink babies, didn't kill them. We turned cheeks, lowered our heads, but our hearts rose in spirit, volcanoes of culture. I walked among the hundreds of faces, humbled in the presence of peace. I've witnessed the meek, the thousand smiles of grace. Because God called, Negroes answered as Christian soldiers. Blacks took to Jesus like a crawfish to mud. God is no stranger in our homes. We are soldiers at war under divine charge. Prayer, the only down payment. Faith, the daily deposit. Whatever the cost of time, God paid in death to Jim Crow, segregation, rights, civil rights, affirmative cells furnished each generation, at least for those about the Lord's business. The constant cost, a listening heart to the greatest voice to echo. So we rap to the Lord regularly, consult on corners at church, and in the quiet of a look. We've come this far by faith. We've come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, trusting in His holy word. He's never failed me yet. Oh, can't turn around. We've come this far by faith.